Okay, welcome everyone to our virtual planners gathering today. Oakland County Hazard Mitigation Plan, a draft review. So just a few reminders before we get started. The meeting's being recorded, and please mute your audio and turn off your camera. And if you have questions, please use the chat function in Zoom and direct your questions to Jim Schaefer. Jim is going to moderate the question and answer period after the presentation. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome Daiko Abe from Integrated Solutions Consulting, and take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you all for attending our meeting today. Today we'll discuss the Oakland County Hazard Mitigation Plan, provide everybody a status update on where we're at, the importance of the plan, and make sure that all those who need to have visibility on the plan have an opportunity to do so. So as Ryan mentioned, my name is Daiko Abe, and I'm working with Oakland County Emergency Management and Homeland Security with Tom Hardesty and Michael Kemenek and their team on updating the 2023 Hazard Mitigation Plan for the county. It's a multi-jurisdictional plan, so it includes all the incorporated jurisdictions within Oakland County and the unincorporated areas as well. So just by way of invitation, if you registered through the registration process, we should already have your name, title, organization, and contact information. But if you happen to be in a setting where you're in a conference room with multiple individuals, or if you did not provide some of these details, if you could use the chat function within Zoom and direct them to Jim, we want to make sure that we've documented everyone that's participated today. And I'll talk about why some of these little details matter. Just by way of example, your participation today, really counts toward not just the municipal jurisdictional participation in the plan update process, but also as a key stakeholder and subject matter expert and member of the general public. And so as one of the requirements, if we were to submit the plan with your name, organization, and contact information, indicate your participation, but we did not include your title, that's something that the plan would come back from FEMA saying that we have not met requirements. That's the level of detail and the level of scrutiny that this plan undergoes as part of the state and federal review process. So again, we want to make sure that we've documented everyone that's participated. If you haven't provided this information via the registration process, please do so. But just wanted to kind of use that as an example as to the level of scrutiny that this plan undergoes as part of the review process. And then additionally, some key contacts that we want to make sure that you have access to, specifically Tom Hardesty and Michael Kemenek from Emergency Management and Homeland Security, but also my contact information. If you do have any questions later on in the presentation, we will give you access to our online planning system. Based on the registrations, you will be given access to the online planning system where the plan is maintained, especially for the municipalities. And so if you have any issues, having access to my contact information may be helpful. So just by way of agenda, we'll talk about the mitigation planning process and overview, why it's important, the process that we have undergone to this point, some new changes. So for those who have been involved in mitigation planning since the first iteration of the plan back in 2005, as of April 19th, 2023, there's some new requirements that have made even more requirements and expectations as far as the plan, and especially with each participating jurisdiction. We'll talk about some of the key elements of the plan, some key findings, and then there's one aspect regarding plan integration that I think your role as planners and as members of your respective communities can provide a lot of value in this iteration and future iterations of the plan. And then I also want to take some time to talk about how this plan can benefit your community and why this plan is so important, especially from the standpoint of grants and FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance dollars. And so we'll talk about some of those key benefits, and then point you in the direction of where you can access the draft plan when it becomes available. And then we'll set aside 10 to 15 minutes for any questions that you might have. So just kind of a historical overview of the mitigation planning process, the mitigation plan itself for Oakland County. This is a multi-jurisdictional plan, meaning you have the county and all 62 jurisdictions that are participating in the plan. It was first created in 2005. The Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 was the legislation federally that was the impetus for mitigation planning and the driver for eligibility for hazard mitigation assistance grants. Since then, the plan has been updated again in 2011, 2012. In 2017, 2018, our team supported the county in that update. And then we are again updating the 2023 plan based on some of the new requirements that became effective April 19, 2023. So a really important plan. It's a large plan because it is multi-jurisdictional in nature. And so for those who have been part of this process, we thank you for your involvement, for your participation. And I think going forward, there's just going to be continual efforts to make this even better and more reflective of the needs of the county. So in terms of mitigation, just very briefly, it's any sustained action, activity, project, initiative taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property from a hazard event. So it's anything we do, whether it's structural mitigation, whether it's doing flood mitigation, green space, even making sure your ordinances, building codes are reflective of best practices and ways to mitigate and prevent natural hazards from impacting our assets, which include people, infrastructure, roads, bridges, key resources like schools and hospitals. It's anything we do to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life. And so the foundation of the mitigation plan is identifying mitigation strategies or projects that help us move toward reducing and eliminating risk to all of our key assets in the county. Some other benefits: life safety is always going to be our #1 priority, but a lot of emphasis on property protection, mitigating and building resilience within our critical infrastructure. Through this process, we are required to engage the public and invite them to participate and inform the mitigation plan. And then, as I was mentioning, kind of the historical narrative of the mitigation plan in Oakland County beginning in 2005. It is a state and federal mandate to update the mitigation plan once every 5 years. And so every 5 years, it goes through a state and federal review process. There's a pretty extensive crosswalk, a plan review tool that both the state and feds review and analyze and ensure that not only the county, but each participating jurisdiction has met those requirements. And so that has to be submitted once every 5 years. That ensures that the county and all the participating jurisdictions are counted as being part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan, which then enables the county and all the jurisdictions to seek after and be eligible for FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance grant dollars, both pre-disaster and post-disaster programs that provide additional funding, typically 75% of the cost of the project. The locals pitch in 25% in-kind or monetary cash to meet the match. But if you think of some of these large flood mitigation, infrastructure, safe room type projects, having the Fed support 75% of the cost can be very, very helpful and advantageous. So that's why this plan is so important. In fact, the county recently, and there are probably other examples as well, but recently, as far as part of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC Hazard Mitigation program, they were eligible and received dollars to help design and scope their new EOC construction, the safe room aspect. And so for this iteration of the BRIC project grant cycle, now we're moving forward with the actual construction and the project side of building the EOC and the safe room secondary power elements for the county. And so when you look at the value of the plan, super important to be part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan. And so in the application, it will ask, are you part of or been involved in a FEMA approved mitigation plan? And so you have to indicate yes to be eligible for the ability to apply for these mitigation grants. So key activities that have been conducted thus far, some of you may have been participants in these activities. So if you have, thank you so much. We held a number of webinars back in June to initiate this process and to set the expectations, invite the county and participating jurisdictions to be involved in the update of the 2023 plan. A series of workshops were held in person throughout the county in July. And in those workshops, we identified and reassessed the hazards based on the new April 19th requirements. Also, a requirement of the plan is to update past mitigation initiatives and provide a status update as to whether they're ongoing, no longer needed, completed, need to be removed, and then an opportunity to identify new mitigation strategies as well. Surveys to meet the public participation requirement were distributed throughout the county, utilizing various methods similar to the 2017-2018 update. We've had over 900 residents that have entered the survey and participated. It's a long survey, so if you've participated, you know that this was not a 5-question survey. I think there's over 30 questions that go beyond just the mitigation plan, but really help Tom and his team understand from a preparedness, resiliency standpoint, how best to support the residents in the county, and how resilient are residents and what are their expectations? What have they done to better prepare? And then what are some of their risk perceptions and expectations as far as mitigation is concerned? So that survey was distributed and a public forum was held on July 19th in Oakland County to, again, engage the public. As part of the survey process, we also were very intentional about engaging and getting input from underserved communities and making sure their needs were represented throughout not only the survey, but throughout the entire planning process. So in the plan, as you review the draft and have access to the draft, you'll see in volume 1 that there's a lot of emphasis on ensuring that we're capturing and understanding where those underserved, disadvantaged areas are and what the issues and concerns might be. Additionally, in terms of key activities, and this is something based on your registration and based on your contact information, with approval from Tom and Michael from Homeland Security and Emergency Management, we will provide invitations to specifically volume 2 of the online planning system. Each participating jurisdiction was given a section in the plan, and throughout the planning process, we've captured who those plan participants were, how they were engaged, what they were involved with, whether or not came to a webinar, workshop, completed the hazard analysis section for your community, submitted any new mitigation projects, updated past mitigation actions. So for each community, we have a dashboard that articulates real time who's been involved, what you've done. And early on in the process, this was important so that communities could know what do I have left to do. And so now that we're at the tail end of the project, we've gotten great participation from all the participating jurisdictions. But we're really excited about engaging this group because not only for this plan update, but going forward, making sure we have broad representation from all members of the local planning team, from your local communities, is really, really important because each brings different perspectives, different needs, different initiatives that are reflected as mitigation projects and actions. So again, you'll be given access to volume 2 and we'll be able to see this for your own jurisdiction. So I want to talk about some of the new guidance. So for those that have been involved historically, the mitigation planning process is still, for the most part, the same. We have to assess the hazards, understand the hazards. That represents the problem, the issues, right? And then the mitigation strategy or projects, those represent the solution to mitigate, prevent, minimize the impact of those hazards. So the process, the concept hasn't necessarily changed. But again, on April 19, 2023, they included some additional requirements to increase, elevate, and improve the plans even more. So throughout this process, this meeting today, you're going to hear me say the word each a lot. There's a lot more requirements and expectations, even though this is a county plan that includes all the various participating jurisdictions. It used to be that we could articulate a lot of the planning needs at a county-wide level, but now FEMA wants to see greater articulation from each participating jurisdiction when it comes to the risks, the capabilities, the mitigation strategies and projects. The plan participation piece was always there, but they want to see broader representation. There's also a lot more focus on ensuring that we're really capturing and understanding those individuals and groups who are most vulnerable in our community, so the underserved populations. And then more importantly, making sure our mitigation strategies projects are equitable, that as we are looking to mitigate and improve our community, that we are considering the impact to those underserved, disadvantaged communities, making sure the impacts of our strategies are equitable in nature. The other piece that's new is just a greater emphasis on climate change and their respective impacts. It used to be a best practice to include that. Now it's a requirement. So for all natural hazards, we have to have a statement or analysis on climate change, their potential impact on each community as far as the potential probability, the severity of impacts, and so forth. So even for something like earthquake, we are required by law to provide an articulation of climate change on the impact of earthquake. So as you look at the plan and you look at things that maybe don't seem logical or intuitive, just note that we are writing the plan not necessarily for FEMA, but we want to ensure you have a FEMA approved mitigation plan. So there are going to be things in the plan that are included that are strictly meant to ensure that we clearly articulate and meet the FEMA requirements. So there's a few things in there that I just want to bring to your awareness so that when you see it, you're not alarmed or wondering what our team is doing as far as the update process. One of the requirements as part of the update and the April 19th requirements is that they did articulate that this is not intended to be a full rewrite. So if there's certain things that haven't changed, don't need to be updated, maps, analyses, narrative, we don't necessarily need to rewrite the whole plan. They do recognize this is a very arduous process for not just the county, but for each participating jurisdiction. So they do acknowledge that for many plans, now that we're 3-4 iterations in, it's simply an update. So just want to kind of set that expectation that the intent is not to rewrite the plan every 5 years. The other component that I really want to highlight for this group is the word each. And I've actually pulled language directly from the FEMA mitigation crosswalk, the plan review tool that FEMA and the state use to evaluate the plan. So for multi-jurisdictional plans, for example, Volume 1 articulates the countywide impacts from the various hazards that affect all communities. But in those instances where that specific community may be impacted, for example, by flooding or by a specific hazard, where the impacts are very unique and specific just to that jurisdiction, or perhaps we need to articulate a certain area in the community that experiences flooding, things that are very unique and specific, those elements we have to draw out in the plan for each participating jurisdiction. So we've done that in Volume 2 and invited stakeholders from each community to provide the unique and specific information. The majority of the information will be captured in Volume 1 in the risk assessment section. A lot of the impacts from the hazards are countywide in nature, but we did invite everybody to provide unique and specific considerations for their respective community. The other one that's really new and very interesting, and already we're seeing different FEMA reviewers interpret this requirement differently, is that each plan participant must identify one or more mitigation action the participant intends to implement for each hazard addressed in the risk assessment. So by law, this is a natural hazard plan. So the Stafford Act, the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, specifically articulates that we must address all natural hazards that potentially could affect the county. So for every single natural hazard, the requirement is that each jurisdiction must identify one or more mitigation project for each natural hazard. That's a new requirement. In order to meet that, since many of the jurisdictions, as we worked with your respective communities, had meaningful projects, but not necessarily for each natural hazard. We included previously a section in the plan where it was more of an Oakland County all participating jurisdiction section, where there's a number of actions that a jurisdiction could point to in the event they wanted to go after a specific grant and provide the justification in the plan. We had a Oakland County all participating jurisdiction section. We're finding that some FEMA reviewers don't like that, and that if we were to include that, they would still require for that specific action who from each jurisdiction would be involved, the budget, the funding, the schedule. And so because we don't know who's going to review the plan, we have provided every jurisdiction a new action that is meaningful, that really focuses on public education and outreach. But we've included that for every jurisdiction. It's all hazards, so it's a strategy that addresses all natural hazards. And instead of saying all natural hazards, we actually go through and list each natural hazard to meet that requirement. So every jurisdiction will be able to meet this requirement, but going forward, instead of including actions that are somewhat generic, we would invite communities and planners to be very intentional and thoughtful about mitigation strategies and projects that really help to build that resilience, protect their community, and so forth. But this is a new mitigation requirement. So very quickly, as we go through some of the key elements of the plan, just so this group has visibility on what the scope and nature of the plan is including, the natural hazards, as I mentioned, are required. And so this list provides a listing of all the natural hazards that are included in the Oakland County multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. So we've addressed all the major hazards. If we don't include a specific hazard, such as tsunami, hurricane, we actually have to articulate in the plan. So that's another piece in the plan. As you see it, you may find it odd that we're calling out things that are very obvious to you. But again, that's a FEMA requirement. If we don't do that, the plan comes back as not met, not meeting requirements. So there's little things that we include to ensure compliance. But these are the hazards that are included. These were vetted based on the previous plan and through the steering committee and through the webinar and workshop process, and with input from the public through our public meeting and our survey. Because this is your plan, not FEMA's plan, and because this is an opportunity to really look at all hazards that potentially could affect the county and provide a somewhat quantifiable analysis of the threats and concerns in the county, these man-made hazards are also included, and a qualitative analysis assessment narrative is included for each of these hazards. Specifically past occurrences, potential impacts, areas of concern. And so this is a pretty comprehensive list. We've done a lot of mitigation planning in a lot of different areas, and I would say that your plan is one of the more comprehensive in terms of inclusion of both natural and man-made hazards. And so again, just want to share this to this group so you have visibility on the scope of what's included in this plan. Just again, so you have a little bit of comparison, and I'll talk about the methodology used to rank the hazards. I really don't want folks to get too excited about the ranking process. The ranking the hazards isn't necessarily a requirement of FEMA. It's a good practice. If anything, This should just reinforce what you as subject matter experts already know about your community in terms of the concerns you have. The correlation with your hazard ranking and your top hazards should be that, yes, this is obvious and it passes the intuitive test. But secondly, your top hazards should have the most mitigation projects. So if you have a lot of flooding concerns, we would hope that when we look at all the different mitigation initiatives in the county and in the jurisdictions, that we would find that many communities are identifying flooding as a concern, or the threat of winter storm and severe winter weather, high winds, severe winds, and so forth. So the correlation really is more your top hazards. There should be greater focus and emphasis on identifying mitigation projects to mitigate these specific hazards and concerns. And so when you compare the 2023 ranking to the 2017-18 ranking, you see some slight changes as far as the ranking goes, but in terms of the hazards, I would say that for the most part, there's a certain level of consistency across the two. What I would note, and in the plan, there's a lot more detail and articulation as far as the methodology that was used to update the 2023 plan and the ranking process. We modified our methodology to be very intentional and specific about meeting every single FEMA requirement as it pertains to the risk assessment. So the requirement is we have to articulate probability and future probability of hazard events. We have to articulate vulnerability, and the way FEMA defines vulnerability is exposure of assets to a hazard. The extent is the magnitude, intensity, severity of specific events. So, for example, earthquake, the extent of earthquake in Oakland County isn't going to be the same as an earthquake in California. So being able to measure the extent, severity, magnitude of certain hazards is a FEMA requirement. The impact components is a requirement of FEMA. The consequence score is a measure of, if the event happened, what would be the score and what would be the impact and the severity. The total risk score is a measure of consequence and probability. And so when you look at all the different factors that are included in each of these broader categories, probability of occurrence, we look at historical data based on the National Weather Service, based on local data. Extent factors look at magnitude, intensity. The catastrophic factor, vulnerability, has three different components that we look at in terms of exposure. FEMA requires that we, as part of vulnerability, measure changes in development in the past 5 years. So certain changes may have increased or even decreased your vulnerability to certain hazards. We have to measure that. The impact factor, we look at population life safety. So we're looking at past injuries, casualty data for certain hazards. We've also included an underserved and equity factor as part of our assessment. We look at property damages, historical property damages, using the NCDC database that's provided to us, other FEMA databases, the economic, environmental impact, essential operations impact. Another FEMA requirement is future development. So as we look at future development trends, does that increase the likelihood and severity of impacts from that hazard? And then we also include a climate change factor as part of measuring and assessing all the scores for each hazard. So a lot more inclusive in terms of making sure that we're looking at all possible factors. A lot of mitigation plans, all they look at is probability and impact, and they score the two, come up with a generic score. We try to be a little bit more intentional this time in bringing in a lot of different considerations. All that is informed by data and the narrative in volume 1 of the mitigation plan. Another example of the draft plan and the current plan in terms of how it's currently constituted and some of the things that we did this go around that's different from the last plan. Some of the mapping that we've included in this iteration of the plan have started to incorporate some additional tools that are available by FEMA. For example, the FEMA Community Resiliency Challenge Index scores looks at 22 different indicators of resiliency, and they've mapped it out by census tract. And so this is just an example of those 22 different indicators, factors that FEMA looks at and has incorporated into each census tract. So for example, when we're just looking at the historical tornado track and potential impact of tornado on Oakland County and each participating jurisdiction by census tract, we've mapped out based on these previous indicators of vulnerability and resiliency, mapped it out for the county, and then overlaid the historical tornado tracks in EF1 and above, just to provide some visibility. We've also incorporated this for flooding and some other hazards. And so I share this as an example, just so you can see how, as opposed to just providing population density maps and analyses and overlaying the hazard on top of some of those density maps, we are trying to be a lot more intentional about understanding those individuals in the county that are most vulnerable, who are represented as underserved or disadvantaged groups in our community. And so with the new tools that are available, the more data that's available, I think each iteration of the plan is just going to become that much better. And so we've integrated some of these new products into the mitigation plan this go around, again, just to be very intentional about trying to better understand the risks and concerns in the county and in each participating jurisdiction. So now as we get into the mitigation strategy, so the hazard risk assessment really is an articulation of what is the problem, where are our problem areas, where are our concerns, where do we have the greatest risks when it comes to our natural hazards. The mitigation strategy section is an opportunity to define high overarching goals, and then within those goals, identify a comprehensive range of possible mitigation measures and projects. And so to date, we have about over 300 mitigation projects that have been identified for the county and for all participating jurisdictions. As always, there's always going to be an opportunity to continually improve and make these even better. And the goal ultimately is for project implementation, whether using local funds, capital funds, or through FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance grants. And again, I call out that requirement that each plan participant must identify one or more mitigation action for each hazard. And so that will be kind of a new bar that's set, and going forward, an opportunity to continually improve and identify additional mitigation projects. So just kind of share, since this really represents the focus and the vision of the county and participating jurisdictions as it pertains to what the priorities are for mitigation purposes in the county. The items in red, they represent items that we have changed or improved based on the last iteration of the plan. Some of these changes are to better align with the new April 19th requirements. Some of the changes were included because as we looked at the county's overall strategic plan and vision, we wanted to align the goals of the mitigation plan and to integrate and to support, complement the county's overall goals. And so, as I mentioned early on, life safety is always going to be our #1 priority. And so that is goal #1. Goal #2, community lifelines is a new concept within FEMA, within Homeland Security. So we're trying to be intentional about using language that is being pushed and supported by FEMA It's actually a pretty novel and interesting concept as far as priority and lifelines, but protecting critical infrastructure, community lifelines within Oakland County, protecting the assets, so that includes people, properties, key resources, by implementing structural and non-structural mitigation activities. Goal 4, strengthen relationships between the public sector, private sector entities, and leaders from underserved communities and residents to enhance community resiliency and resilience. Again, that really kind of speaks to some of the strategic initiatives in the county. And then goal 5, increasing awareness, education, and preparedness of public business and nonprofit government about the various hazards that can affect the county. So the public outreach, education aspect. Goal 6, promote coordination between public service sectors, encourage participation in sustainable and cost-effective mitigation projects. When we look at the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC program specifically, one of the emphasis of the BRIC program, and especially to meet the benefit cost analysis requirements, having large regional multi-jurisdictional projects that have benefit beyond just a single entity, a single jurisdiction, are going to have a better chance of being approved and funded by FEMA. So we definitely wanted to include that. And then goal 7, encourage systematic updates and adoptions of regulations and policies to include climate change. Plan integration, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is becoming really, really important. And it's something that the county is already leading forward on. And I'll mention some of the things that the county is already doing to help meet that requirement, not just for the county, but all participating jurisdictions. So one of the requirements that's always hard to meet and where we typically get feedback from FEMA, and these days when we submit a plan, we always expect some feedback from the state and or FEMA because the requirements, the bar has been set really, really high. This is one of those areas where we always get feedback and where FEMA would like to see more improvement going forward. And the requirement is, does the plan describe a process by which each community will integrate the requirements of the mitigation plan into other planning mechanisms? And since we have so many planners here and you represent your respective communities, I wanted to call this out because in the past, we could say that in the next plan update, we'll make a concerted effort to meet this requirement. Well, now we've had the 2005 plan, the 2012 plan, the 2018 plan. Now we're on the 23 plan. And so we're at a point where FEMA is saying, well, you've had 4 chances to do this, and we haven't seen proof or benefit or evidence of plan integration. So it used to be that in the plan update process, we would incorporate elements of the mitigation plan, other plans into the mitigation plan and reference those documents, your master plans and so forth. But now FEMA wants to see that reciprocated. They want to see, is the mitigation plan and these key elements being integrated into other planning mechanisms? Please show evidence of that. And so the other element of the requirement, a multi-jurisdictional plan must describe each participant's individual process for integrating information from the mitigation strategy into their identified planning mechanisms. And so again, this each participating jurisdiction, a lot more emphasis, the bar's been raised. We can't just say the county is doing it. We have to show that each participating jurisdiction is doing that. The benefit that each jurisdiction here has is that because of the formal review process for your master plans, and because there's a lot of emphasis by the county and by each participating jurisdiction and already doing this as part of your master plan review, that really helps to alleviate this. But my invitation to the group is, if there are other plans beyond the master plan or other documents that you have successfully integrated or included hazard risk information into these other plans or programs, if you could provide that information to myself, to Tom and Michael, that would be greatly appreciated, and we can call that out as a best practice. And then just going forward, as you're updating other capital improvement plans, master plans, other documents, climate action plans, please make a conscious effort by name to indicate the mitigation plan as a source and how you integrated the mitigation plan into these other documents. That will go a long ways for the next plan update in 2027, 2028. So very quickly, how can this plan support and benefit my community? By requirement, we're on an expedited planning process. A lot of times these FEMA grants that help fund these projects, there's a lot of delays within FEMA right now over the last 2 years. So we're on an expedited process. There are a number of BRIC project grants that are being pushed forward currently that are dependent on a FEMA approved mitigation plan. So in a best case scenario year where we had ample time and FEMA didn't provide unnecessary delays, the review process would be much longer. But the reality is the importance of this plan and getting it adopted to be eligible for FEMA project funding is super critical right now. So we've been working on an expedited schedule, and throughout this whole summer, the communities have been very, very helpful and supportive of this expedited process. Once we get a notification from FEMA saying the plan has been approved, in order to ensure that your community is counted as being part of the approved mitigation plan, you must adopt the plan by resolution. So the county will lean forward and provide a sample resolution of the adoption process, but just note you are not counted as being part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan until you formally adopt the plan. That guidance, that information will be forthcoming later this year, toward the end of this year, for each participating jurisdiction. The other piece that's really important is that if there are mitigation projects, initiatives in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years that you know your community wants to implement, you know you potentially may want to utilize FEMA mitigation assistance grants to do these projects, please, please, please make sure those projects are identified for your respective community. In the application, in the FEMA Go portal, specifically for BRIC grants, it will ask, are you part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan? And after this year, you will be able to say yes. The second part, especially in the notice of intent, it will ask, where in the plan do you indicate you want to do this project? And so there's 2 parts. You have to adopt the plan, be part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan. The second part is to make sure those projects are identified in the plan. The second part is you'll notice that some of these projects are intentionally very broad. Some of the best practices as part of identifying and defining the mitigation actions is that if you're too specific, for example, we had a community in FEMA Region 5 indicate that they wanted to do property buyouts for repetitive loss properties in the county. And so they had a property, they wanted to go after BRIC funding to remove, to purchase and acquire that property because of flood issues. But because that property was not a repetitive loss property by FEMA's definition, they were rejected because in that case, they were too specific. So when we're developing these mitigation actions, sometimes we are intentionally broad so that we can point back to a project and not be so specific that we unintentionally exclude ourselves from being eligible. So in some cases, we may say we may want to do flood mitigation, drainage project at these locations to include but not limited to, and then you will list your problem areas, but that language allows for broader implementation and flexibility as far as the project is concerned. So you will note that some of these projects are intentionally broad. That is actually by design so that we're not too specific. However, if you have a project that you know you want to do and you have the specific location, it's a project that in essence is going to happen, being specific is okay. And as we review those projects, if there's opportunities to broaden the scope of the project just to ensure that you have a little bit more leverage, we may do so. So just some best practices, some lessons learned as far as that's concerned. And then finally, as we kind of conclude this, just highlighting a few programs. On the pre-disaster mitigation side, there's the BRIC program I've referenced multiple times. It's nationally competitive. You must have an approved mitigation plan. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program is also another program that's eligible for those communities that belong to NFIP. That's part of the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. As far as BRIC is concerned, in the olden days, where it used to be PDM, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, the BRIC program has in essence replaced the PDM program. You're seeing a lot more availability of funding available now through BRIC than ever before. And that's because the new law that's driving the BRIC program basically takes a 6% set aside from the estimated disaster grant expenditures from the previous years and sets it aside for BRIC funding. So because we've had a lot of big disaster years, 6% of billions represents, in this case, billions of dollars of available mitigation dollars. So very exciting that FEMA is placing more emphasis priority on mitigation grant assistance dollars through the BRIC program. Another program that's available on the post-disaster recovery side is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That typically is a little bit more friendly in terms of the application process. It's state managed and not quite as competitive as BRIC. And so same thing with BRIC. Typically, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program provides 75% of the cost of the project. You provide 25% match. The 404 or Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is also another opportunity to implement and receive funding for mitigation purposes. Historically, I have found that the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is an easier on-ramp for implementing mitigation purposes. The dollar values may not be quite as extensive as BRIC, but just want to share that for awareness. And then for those communities who have experienced presidential disaster declarations, the 406 program of the PA program, that helps implement mitigation for those structures, facilities that have been damaged. So if there's an opportunity to raise apparatus above base flood elevation, instead of following the law and rebuilding to pre-disaster specifications, Section 406 allows us to rebuild better and smarter by implementing mitigation. So there's a number of different programs available for mitigation funding. All that being said, need to be part of a FEMA approved mitigation plan. Make sure those projects are identified for your community in the plan. So in conclusion, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. We're finalizing the draft now. The draft of the plan will be provided at the following website, and I believe this recording will be made available and perhaps even these slides on the Oakland County Emergency Management Homeland Security site. There's a dedicated hazard mitigation plan site. The draft of volume 1 specifically will be provided there. Based on the registration for this meeting and this planners gathering, we will give folks, if you haven't already been given access to volume 2 of the plan, this will give you the ability to actually go in and see what your community has identified and the different individuals that have been involved, the dashboard, and the various mitigation strategies and actions for each community. And they're all organized the same. Everyone has visibility on everyone else's sections, just so that you can see what other communities are doing. And so they're organized by new actions, ongoing actions, and then for some communities where certain actions have been removed, we provide a historical narrative documentation of that. So this section is just a piece where communities could have ownership of their respective section in the plan and provide additional guidance. If in the event you decide that, there's some additional projects that we want to submit within each community, again, every community is set up the same. If you go to the new mitigation action section, doesn't matter which community, it will actually give you the ability, a built-in form to submit a new action. And so if there's additional projects you want to add at the last minute, we can certainly do that. The other thing I want to note is that this is meant to be maintained, reviewed each year. And so there's a mechanism in the plan maintenance piece that if there's additional things that were missed as part of this 5-year update that need to be included, there's a mechanism to continually improve, update, and make this plan reflective of the needs of your community and the county as a whole. So with that, with 10 minutes remaining, I will pause and just thank everybody and thank Tom and Michael for their leadership and guidance and support throughout this planning process. Just really appreciative of all the communities for your support thus far.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dyko. Excellent presentation. We do have a few questions. First one I think has been addressed on your slide there with the one that's up. That's the link to the plan for the first week in October. Second question is, what specific climate change data or information is used as an impact factor?
Yeah, so that's a great question. FEMA, as this new requirement came forward for climate change and including that in the plan, they provided a series of federal resources that we utilized as part of the analysis, especially the mapping and just the data in terms of precipitation, heat trends. But we also look at local data as well. And we try to incorporate that as best as possible. Some communities have the climate action plans. A lot of times that coincides and informs a lot of the different resiliency strategies. And so we like to make sure those are included as far as projects or potential projects. And then as far as certain trends, we always look to the local universities and see if they have any specific data studies and incorporate that into especially the hazard analysis piece.
Okay. Excuse me, I'm not seeing any other questions. If you have questions, put them in the chat to me and I'll moderate them. Okay, looks like you've addressed all of the questions. So again, thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. Turn it over to Ryan to wrap it up. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dyko, for the presentation today, and also thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.